This is an NBC News special. Reagan at Bitburg. Live coverage of the president's visit to the German military cemetery. Here is Tom Brokaw in New York.
A good Sunday morning to you. I'm Tom Brokaw here, and in West Germany now it is mid-afternoon, and President Reagan is just arriving at the American Air Force Base. You can see Air Force One at Bitburg, West Germany, just outside of the small village which houses the military cemetery, which has become the focus of so much attention and controversy. This is one of the most sensitive and controversial days of his presidency. This visit to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp earlier today, which was scheduled after his announcement that he would go to the Bitburg German military cemetery. The official party now exiting Air Force One. Many people did not realize that there is a large American Air Force base at Bitburg. It's the 36th Tactical Fighter Wing. It's been there since 1952. There are 4,300 Air Force and Army personnel and 6,200 dependents. It represents the closeness of the ties between the United States and West Germany. Bitburg has recorded 3,000 marriages between American servicemen and German women, and the birth of 16,000 children during that time. There have been joint military ceremonies through the years at the military cemetery, where more than 2,000 German soldiers are buried. Andrea Mitchell is standing by at Bitburg this morning. Andrea, can you tell us how are the White House advisors treating this day? With great caution?
With tremendous caution. They're walking on eggshells, Tom. In fact, they put an unscheduled visit to Konrad Adenauer's grave on the schedule this morning, so that the president, before leaving the Bonn area, went to the grave site to honor Konrad Adenauer, who, of course, was the first chancellor of post-war Germany and was credited with really bringing the Federal Republic into being with modern Germany. That was a suggestion from Billy Graham, we are told. That Billy Graham, at the height of this controversy, called the president and suggested that he do this. The president then talked to Chancellor Kohl, who I believe you can now see coming out of Air Force One.
Thank you, Andrea.
Mrs. Kohl.
Yes, we'll take it from here if we can. That is the Chancellor of West Germany, Helmut Kohl, whose idea it was the president go to military cemetery at Bitburg, and now President and Mrs. Reagan, on what obviously has been a difficult day for them. We will be showing you shortly excerpts of the president's appearance at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. It was Helmut Kohl's idea that the president visit the German military cemetery in the spirit of reconciliation, it was said. There was one report from the White House that when he made the appeal to the president, the West German chancellor had tears in his eyes. Ronald Reagan and Helmut Kohl have a close personal relationship as well as a philosophical relationship. Kohl representing the Christian Democrat Party, a more conservative party in West Germany. They will go here from the Air Force Base on a short motorcade to the German military cemetery, which has, as I say, 2,000 German soldiers buried. And the most controversial part of that, of course, is that 49 of the graves contain the remains of members of the SS, the elite guard, the Waffen-SS, the military arm of the elite guard that Hitler established early in his reign. The president has just concluded 2 days of economic summit meetings in Bonn, West Germany, where he has been meeting with America's allies and where he had only mixed results. He attempted to get new trade talks scheduled, but French President Mitterrand was able to block him on that. However, the president did get a statement of support from the other European allies and also from Japan, a statement of support in terms of the United States arms control talks with the Soviet Union, encouraging him to go ahead with those. However, he did not get any endorsement or a statement of support for the American efforts to establish the so-called SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, that is, to establish some kind of a defense mechanism in outer space. President Reagan began this day, as Andrea reported to you, by adding that unscheduled stop to his itinerary. He drove to the small town of Rondorf, just outside of Bonn, West Germany, to pay respects at the grave of West Germany's first chancellor, Konrad Adenauer. The visit was so secret that even the villagers did not know that it was coming. Adenauer's tomb is modest. It's a cross and flat marble slabs inscribed with the names of Adenauer, his second wife, and his parents. All are buried there. Adenauer was a staunch anti-Nazi. He was twice thrown in prison by Hitler. He was Chancellor of the West German Republic, the modern state, from its birth in 1949 through 1963. And now the emotional pace picks up quickly when the president arrived at Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp. He visited first a museum on the grounds of the one-time Nazi death camp, documents and testimony which bear witness to a reign of terror. 50,000 people died here. Under chill gray skies, the Reagans and the Kohls toured Bergen-Belsen with its low grassy mounds.
These children of God, under bleak and lifeless mounds, the plainness of which does not even hint at the unspeakable acts that created them. Here they lie, never to hope, never to pray, never to love, never to heal, never to laugh, never to cry. And too many of them knew that this was their fate. But that was not the end. Through it all was their faith and a spirit that moved their faith. We're all witnesses. We share the glistening hope that rests in every human soul. Hope leads us, if we're prepared to trust it, toward what our President Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. And then, rising above all this cruelty, out of this tragic and nightmarish time, beyond the anguish, the pain, and the suffering for all time, we can and must pledge never again.
The only disruption of the day, and this came a few hours earlier, occurred when police moved protesters, including 11 American Jews, away from the Bergen-Belsen camp. In view of the cameras inside, at least, there were no Jewish representatives at today's ceremonies. The White House and the president had invited several prominent American Jews and others who are instrumental in the efforts to make the Holocaust never to be forgotten, but they declined to join him today. Of course, this has been a controversial visit because of that. When the president first announced that he would not go to a concentration camp, he said that it is time to heal the wounds, that there are many Germans who do not remember that. And then it was announced that he would go to the Bitburg military cemetery, and that would be an effort at reconciliation. Bitburg has dominated the president's European trip since mid-April, when the White House first announced the visit, and the weeks passed, and despite a firestorm of protest from Jewish and other religious groups, veterans organizations, even majority of the House and Senate, both Reagan and German Chancellor Kohl, dug in their heels, and they refused to cancel during all of this time.
It is to cement the 40 years of friendship between a free Germany and the United States, between the German people and the American people, that Chancellor Kohl and I agreed together to lay a wreath at the cemetery for the German war dead. That's why I accepted the invitation to Bitburg, and that's why I'm going. There are 2,000 graves there, and most of those, the average age is about 18. These were those young teenagers that were conscripted, forced into military service in the closing days of the Third Reich. I think that there's nothing wrong with visiting that cemetery where those young men are victims of Nazism also.
May I, Mr. President, if it's possible at all, implore you to do something else, to find a way, to find another way, another site. That place, Mr. President, is not your place. Your place is with the victims of the SS. The issue here is not politics, but good and evil. And we must never confuse them, for I have seen the SS at work, and I have seen their victims. They were my friends, they were my parents.
The final word has been spoken as far as I'm concerned. I think it is morally right to do what I'm doing, and I'm not going to change my mind about that. All of those in that cemetery have long since met the supreme judge of right and wrong. And whatever punishment or justice was needed has been rendered by one who is above us all.
Reconciliation over the graves is right, and I'm certain, however sorry I may feel about it, that my friend Ronald Reagan has to face such great difficulties. I am certain that he is right with this wonderful gesture, this fine gesture, and I think in the face of history, this attitude will prevail as a great achievement of a great president.
Chancellor Kohl brought up the possibility of Bitburg last fall during a visit to Washington. For many years now, local American, French, and West German military commanders have gone to that cemetery every November to join in a wreath-laying ceremony honoring all those who died in World War II. But apparently no one, including the White House advance team or the U.S. Embassy, ever bothered to check out the identity of the dead at Bitburg. More than most of the 2,000 German soldiers who are buried there were killed in the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944. That was the last major assault by the Germans in World War II, counting 200,000 casualties on both sides. Nearly 100 of the graves are those of men who fought in World War I, but at least 49 headstones are clearly marked SS and contain the remains of Nazi stormtroopers. The SS, originally the security arm of the Nazi Party, pledged allegiance to Hitler first, country second. By the end of the war, nearly 1 million Germans had worn SS uniforms. It was the SS that killed most of the estimated 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. It was the SS which massacred an entire French village, including 207 children. It was the SS that massacred American POWs, then used their bodies for target practice. And it was the SS which the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal designated a criminal organization. Although none of the 49 graves that contain the remains of the SS troopers has been identified as any trooper who took part in any of those massacres, it is, of course, something that has enraged many people that the president would stop by there. We're going to show you pictures now at Bitburg Military Cemetery outside this small village. And Chris Wallace is standing by there now. Chris?
Well, Tom, we just arrived at the cemetery, and the first thing that you have to notice, for all the sound and fury over the last few weeks, is what a lovely, peaceful cemetery this is. Flowers marking each of the gravestones, and this apparently is unusual. It's been done by the people of Bitburg in the last few days as a sign of support for the fallen soldiers of World War II in this world controversy. There is going to be one addition to the ceremony. It's going to be a very short, very bare wreath laying, but in one more sign of reconciliation you can look for, Chancellor Kohl and President Reagan have invited two World War II foes to join them for this wreath laying. U.S. Army General Matthew Ridgway, one of the legendary figures of World War II, will accompany the President, and German Air Force General Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe veteran, will accompany Chancellor Kohl. It'll be very brief, very spare, simply a wreath laying, but of course, that is what this controversy has been all about, the fact that President Reagan would even set foot in the cemetery with those SS graves.
First, the people of the village of Bitburg, who have such a strong relationship with the Americans who are stationed, both Air Force and Army personnel at the nearby base, are quite embittered by the reputation that their village now has gained in many quarters in this country, and they feel strongly that it's been an unfair representation for them. They have been living peaceably in post-World War West Germany now for 40 years, side by side with the Americans. There is a spirit of reconciliation that goes there, that even many marriages, and someone said something like 6,000, perhaps as many as 8,000 children born of the marriages of West Germans and American service personnel who are stationed there. In New Jersey this morning, watching all of this at Temple Emmanuel is Elie Wiesel. As you can see, he will be watching with us this morning, and then we will be talking with him. You heard him just a few moments ago as he made his eloquent appeal to President Reagan not to go to the cemetery today, but the president later saying that he felt that it was the morally appropriate thing for him to do, and therefore he is going forward with the visit. There probably has been, Chris, wouldn't you agree that there probably has been no more difficult time for the Reagan administration, apart from, say, the bombing in Lebanon, than this particular two-day period?
Absolutely. One of the things that makes this all so tragic is the whole point of this ceremony on this state visit after the summit was to celebrate that friendship between the United States and Germany that you talked about. And one of the reasons they chose Bitburg was because of the close relations between the U.S. Army base and the German people of the town. And for the president, who has spoken out, I think we must say for the record, who has spoken out very eloquently about the Holocaust many times over his public career, to now be called insensitive on this issue is very hurtful. But nonetheless, people like Mr. Wiesel do call him insensitive and say that he is somehow blurring the moral distinction between good and evil, between the SS and other Germans.
Are there any signs of protesters at the Bitburg military cemetery?
No, I've talked to some of our producers who are fanned out across the Bitburg area, and they say there are a couple of demonstrations, and at least one, apparently, there was some violence, a violent confrontation with police. But here at the cemetery, it is an utterly peaceful scene. You see no townsfolk. There are a few hundred reporters who have been allowed in, a military guard at one end of the cemetery, and then all the gravestones and the flowers at the head of each gravestone. No people from the town, certainly no demonstrations at all. It is a very quiet spring afternoon here in Bitburg, Germany.
This military cemetery was established after the war, and the remains of German soldiers were brought here from throughout Europe. And as I say, about 2,000 are buried all together. And it is a place where the joint services come together every fall, and have for 25 years, we're told. Americans, the French, and the West Germans for a joint wreath-laying ceremony that, in a way, is a spiritual representation of the alliance that has been established since World War II at Bitburg, West Germany, in the small village that is known primarily for its breweries. Marvin Kalb is in Bonn today. Marvin, do you have any sense yet about how this is affecting the relations between not just the United States and West Germany, but the entire European alliance? You've spent 2 days now watching these meetings that have dealt not only with trade issues, of course, but also with the political issues.
Tom, it's very difficult to judge that. The only leader who has made, to the best of my knowledge, a public statement was British Prime Minister Thatcher. It was a negative statement. It was critical of the president's decision to visit Bitburg. I do not know of any others, and what the spokesmen here are telling us very carefully is that the issue of Bitburg did not arise in any of the bilaterals except the bilateral between the president and the Chancellor of West Germany. There emerged a continuing controversy as to whether there is collective guilt, to what extent that exists, and what the president's exact views were.
Marvin, we're going to go back to Bitburg here momentarily. The president will spend a very brief time at the cemetery, only about 10 minutes. He will not make a speech there. He will then go back to the American Air Force Base, where he has some remarks that we've been able to look at, and he will talk about the spirit of reconciliation. That is the very premise, of course, of his visit. And earlier today, he made a particularly eloquent speech at Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp, and we'll be showing you that as well. We'll be on the air here for about 90 minutes altogether today, as the president has a long and difficult afternoon in West Germany. As I said earlier, Elie Wiesel is at a temple in New Jersey this morning. He has been watching all of that with us. Mr. Wiesel, do you have any feelings this morning about the president's remarks at Bergen-Belsen and the nature of his remarks at Bitburg about whether or not this controversy now will go away, or do you think that it will even become more intense in the days to come?
I feel sadness, very profound sadness. I never thought I would live to see this day. The road from Bergen-Belsen to Bitburg is a very long one, and I thought it would take centuries for humankind to cross it. And the President of the United States had just crossed it in less than 1 hour. What Chris Wallace said earlier, that I called the President insensitive, is not correct. I never called him insensitive. I feel the President is sensitive. I have seen him weep when we evoked the memories of our agony. All I said, and I still say it, I can't understand. And I still don't understand why he chose to come here. We are pained, but not against reconciliation. Tomorrow we shall speak maybe and surely about reconciliation, which is necessary. and possible, but not over the graves of murderers. He spoke movingly in Bergen-Belsen. There are graves in Bergen-Belsen, but most of the victims, the children and their mothers and their parents of my people, they have no graves. For the first time in Jewish history, Jewish victims weren't even buried. Heaven has become their cemetery.
Shavizel, we are going to now show you pictures of the president arriving at Bitburg Military Cemetery, and we will be coming back to you later this morning so that we can talk some more about this. Elie Wiesel at Temple Emanuel in New Jersey, and the president arriving now at the Bitburg Military Cemetery in West Germany. Security, as you might expect, has been very tight throughout all of this. That is Mrs. Cole in the black hat, and Mrs. Reagan. As you heard Chris Wallace say earlier, the president has been joined today by General Matthew Ridgway, a well-known American general from the World War II era, and General Steinhoff, who was a fighter pilot for the Germans during World War II. He's currently chairman of the Military Committee of NATO. That's the highest military position in NATO. Chancellor Kohl, whom you see on the left part of your screen, the tall man in the dark coat, is under enormous political pressure in his own country as well, especially from the Social Democrats, who have been critical, saying that they have embarrassed the president, that Chancellor Kohl's government has embarrassed the president with this visit. There will be a wreath-laying ceremony, but no remarks here. The president will return to the Air Force Base before he makes his remarks about the meaning of this visit. The small village of Bitburg was virtually destroyed during World War II during some of the most intense fighting, September 1944. also expected to join the president this morning with the son of the man who led the Hitler assassination plot. He said that he would be a reluctant guest, but that he would be attending. That's the extent of the ceremony. It was small, relatively private, not large crowds, no protesters, no words spoken by the president. And obviously very important and emotional for Chancellor Kohl, who was a young man during World War II. He was just a teenager, 15 years old.
Thank you. Sit down.
Chris Wallace, you're at the site of the military cemetery. Can you tell us what else is going on that we perhaps cannot see in our television pictures?
Well, I think that one point I'd like to make, Tom, is that what you've really seen here is the Reagan media machine working in reverse. No one is more skilled than they are at producing dramatic pictures and dramatic events. And I think that once they were stuck with this event, and Chancellor Kohl would not release them from their commitment, they went out of their way to strip this ceremony down. It was originally to be 20 minutes. I think the actual ceremony here took about 3 or 4 minutes. And obviously, they wanted to minimize the president's involvement in it. As you say, no speeches. He spent most of the time walking to and back talking to General Ridgway. And I think that, frankly, one of the advanced men said to me, we're going to go out of our way to give you bad camera angles on this one. We don't want a memorable moment or a memorable picture. And we really want people, when they think of this day, to think of the great drama of his speech at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and the speech which our viewers will see in a few moments at the Bitburg Air Force Base. So this was really the Reagan team trying to pull their punches as much as they could and try to produce as undramatic a ceremony as possible.
President now preparing to go back to the Air Force Base. They'll go there by motorcade, and then we'll hear his remarks about the meaning of this visit for him personally and for relations between the Republic of West Germany and the United States. 40 years after the end of World War II, the cemetery was established in 1959. As I say, the people in that small village, about 11,000 of them altogether, are particularly embittered by what they believe is an unfair treatment of them. Among other things, we have learned that during Hitler's reign, they gave him very few votes when he was running. And the town was virtually destroyed during World War II. The cemetery is kept up in large part by the villagers of Bitburg. As the president prepares now to return to the Bitburg Air Force Base, where we will be hearing from him in his speech, I'd like to go back now to Temple Emanuel in Westfield, New Jersey, where Elie Wiesel has been watching all of this. Do you have any immediate reaction to what you have just seen, Mr. Wiesel?
I have a feeling of being excluded and rejected. It was a great ceremony, simple, austere, philosophically valid, maybe morally valid as well. After all, what can be more moving, more beautiful than to see former adversaries pay homage to the future by mourning the past? But because of the context, because of our own feelings, of our own memories, because of the invisible graves that cover the universe, somehow I felt that the basic element was missing. We were missing. It was a political gesture between Chancellor Kohl and President Reagan. And we know that what happened 40 years ago was much more than politics. And it's not a political solution that can solve the mystery of what we call now so inadequately the Holocaust.
Can you tell us about the future for you personally, and in terms of how far you want to carry out what will be seen as pressure on the president for this gesture?
Oh, I don't believe in vindictiveness. I believe in memory. And we try to open our memories as offerings. That is the whole purpose of our work, is to teach future generations what can be done, what has been done in the name of wrong ideas, of corrupt ideas. The president is the president of the United States, and I'm sure that he meant well, in spite of everything.
Mr. Wiesel, let me ask you a question. Is it possible that more people now are aware of the Holocaust, that it has been more sharply etched in our memory as a result of these two visits today and the controversy that has grown out of them? In a kind of backward way, did it not work?
Yes, it did. People are more aware because the response of the public, the response of the people and the media, the response of Congress, the response was extraordinary. They all felt that injustice had been committed, and they therefore tried to correct it. But there too, it is inconceivable to me that the president was not responsive to that response. That too is a turning point. So I do believe that the public has learned more. The educational process was set in motion, and we must work harder, and we are going to work harder in the future, so that this awakening will have some basis and some fruit.
Elie Wiesel, thank you very much for being with us this morning. I know that this has been a difficult time for you. Joining me in the studios here in New York is a member of the West German Bundestag and a confidant of Chancellor Kohl, a man who represents, in fact, the electoral district of Bitburg, and he has since 1972. He's Dr. Alois Mertes, and as you were watching those ceremonies, sir, I could not help but notice that you were obviously very moved. Could you describe for us, from your point of view, as a representative of that area and a member of the Bundestag in the modern West German state, what this visit meant to you today?
First of all, for us, this visit was a mourning and praying ceremony. We thought of the dead, and as Jews and Christians prayed together, we thought, Lord, give them eternal rest and eternal peace. And we do not exclude from that prayer the former SS soldiers. A part of them were certainly responsible, a part were not responsible. We are not ready, and we can't be ready as Christians, and I think Jews can also not exclude from that prayer given us by the Old Testament. Second, of course, we have thought after the terrible events, which we will never forget. Nobody will forget them. It would be an insult to think that we will forget them, draw the consequences, and we have done that. Today, exactly 30 years ago, the Federal Republic of Germany became member of the Alliance, and we have said, never again totalitarian rule, and therefore we became members of the Alliance and friends of the United States of America. And when we think of the dead, we do not glorify the policy of that time, we do not glorify crimes committed at that time. We are mourning the dead, and we are praying and working for the future.
But can't you understand the outrage of people like Elie Wiesel and other people who are perhaps not even Holocaust survivors, but just remember what that terrible, indefensible period represented? And wouldn't it have been better to find some other symbol of reconciliation, simply the visit to the Adenauer grave, for example?
It would be unhuman if I would not understand Mr. Wiesel and the survivors of the Holocaust. But their emotions give not the guarantee that everything is fairly judged. I think also of the widows in Germany. I think of the German soldiers who are dead. I think of the children, the grandchildren, and what I am asking for is to understand also us. I was a young man when Hitler came to power, a child indeed, 11 years old. I was 23 years old when the war was over, and I was a German soldier myself. We have served in good faith, not crimes and criminals. We have in good faith defended our country, And we find it a very noble gesture of President Reagan that he underlined the fact that we all will be judged by a supreme judge.
Is there a danger, however, that this has awakened old memories and bitter feelings, and therefore it has not accomplished what you had hoped that it might accomplish in terms of a reconciliation, but in fact it has set back the Republic of West Germany in the minds of a lot of people in this country?
My hope goes in the other direction. Certainly it has revivified old memories, but we have to face that, and we do face that in Germany. The question is, what are the consequences we have to draw? From a human point of view, from a Jewish or Christian point of view, and from a political point of view. I'm not ready, like Mr. Wiesel, to separate the political and the moral. Our decision for the Western world is a moral decision in order not to permit again another totalitarian rule on German soil. And there is another totalitarian power in the world which will drive a wedge between us and the United States, and that is the Soviet Union. And what is good for the Soviet Union can't be good for Israel and for the American Jews.
What can be done next, do you think, Dr. Mertes? Because there is bound to be a residue of some bitter feeling. What next step for your country and for this country to get us past what has been clearly a difficult patch for all parties concerned?
I think we should solidify more still our alliance. People among the younger generation should talk to each other. I am particularly grateful to the American Jewish Committee, who has organized since years meetings between young American Jewish populations and young German populations. All this positive attitude are necessary today, and we must understand, and we will understand, the survivors and the victims of Nazism. But please, Mr. Wiesel and all other people who feel like you, understand us too and have no collective judgment. Only one, and that is God, as we believe, Jews and Christians, can really judge our responsibilities.
Dr. Mertes, thanks very much for being with us this morning. I know that it's been a difficult time for you, not just this moment, but for the past several weeks, but we are grateful for you for joining us this morning. I want to tell you as well that the President spent much more time this morning on his visit to the memorial on the site of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp where tens of thousands of Jews were put to death by the Nazis. A dark obelisk stands as their monument, towering over the huge mounds of earth that are their common graves, 50,000 people altogether buried here. That's the estimate. The President and Mrs. Reagan were accompanied by West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and his wife on a walk through the cemetery. This visit to Bergen-Belsen was added to the President's itinerary after objections were raised to his plan to visit the military cemetery. Here he did honor the victims of the Nazis.
This painful walk into the past has done much more than remind us of the war that consumed the European continent. What we have seen makes unforgettably clear that no one of the rest of us can fully understand the enormity of the feelings carried by the victims of these camps. The survivors carry a memory beyond anything that we can comprehend. The awful evil started by one man, an evil that victimized all the world with its destruction, was uniquely destructive of the millions forced into the grim abyss of these camps. I'm sure we all share similar first thoughts. That is, what of the youngsters who died at this dark Stalag? All was gone for them forever, not to feel again the warmth of life's sunshine and promise, not the laughter and the splendid ache of growing up, nor the consoling embrace of a family. Try to think of being young and never having a day without searing emotional and physical pain, desolate, unrelieved pain. What we felt and are expressing with words cannot convey the suffering that they endured. And that is why history will forever brand what happened as the Holocaust. Here, death ruled. But we've learned something as well. Because of what happened, we found that death cannot rule forever. And that's why we're here today. We're here because humanity refuses to accept that freedom of the spirit of man can ever be extinguished. We're here to commemorate that life triumphed over the tragedy and the death of the Holocaust, overcame the suffering, the sickness, the testing, and yes, the gassings. We're here today to confirm that the horror cannot outlast hope, and that even from the worst of all things, the best may come forth. Therefore, even out of this overwhelming sadness, there must be some purpose, and there is. It comes to us through the transforming love of God. So much of this is symbolized today by the fact that most of the leadership of free Germany is represented here today. Chancellor Kohl, you and your countrymen have made real the renewal that had to happen. Your nation and the German people have been strong and resolute in your willingness to confront and condemn the acts of a hated regime of the past. This reflects the courage of your people and their devotion to freedom and justice since the war. Think how far we've come from that time when despair made these tragic victims wonder if anything could survive. As we flew here from Hanover, low over the greening farms and the emerging springtime of the lovely German countryside, I reflected, and there must have been a time when the prisoners at Bergen-Belsen and those of every other camp must have felt the springtime was gone forever from their lives. Surely we can understand that when we see what is around us. All these children of God, under bleak and lifeless mounds, the plainness of which does not even hint at the unspeakable acts that created them. Here they lie, never to hope, never to pray, never to love, never to heal, never to laugh, never to cry. And too many of them knew that this was their fate. But that was not the end. Through it all was their faith and a spirit that moved their faith.
President Reagan at Bergen-Belsen today, the place where, among others, Anne Frank is also buried. Chancellor Kohl also spoke at the concentration camp. Briefly, he said, "It is a place of unimaginable atrocities. We bow in sorrow before the victims of murder and genocide." We'll be back with continuing coverage of the president at Bitburg in a moment.
What long-range effect will President Reagan's controversial trip to Germany have on our allies and here at home? A special edition of Meet the Press, live from Bonn, Germany, later today.
I'm Jane Pauley. Next week on Today, John McEnroe, celebrity mothers, inmates who help troubled teens, and the president's European trip. Next week on Today.
Hello, I'm Jerry Falwell. I'd like to invite you to join me with the Old Time Gospel Hour each week on this station. You'll enjoy the music of Don Norman, Robbie Heiner, Mike Evans, the Sounds of Liberty, the Old Time Gospel Hour Choir, and others, as we declare the gospel of Christ through music and the preached word. That's the Old Time Gospel Hour every week on this station.
Today only at 12 noon.
Directly or indirectly, everyone's life is shaped in a way by what's going on in the news. And to be part of that, at least to bring what we know to other people in the community is very important. I consider it a tremendous public service to be able to get accurate information, news information out to viewers as fast as we can. And it's a great feeling at the end of the day when you know that you've enlightened or at least informed people just a little bit more.
Bert and Bob on the next Hollywood on 4.
NBC News now continues its coverage of President Reagan at Bitburg. He has just completed a short visit to the German military cemetery, about a ceremony of no more than 3 minutes. The president had nothing to say there. He did participate in a wreath-laying ceremony. Now you hear the cheers from assembled American service personnel, one presumes. This is a fighter airplane base, 36 Tactical Wing there. Also, Army personnel are stationed at Bitburg. President and Chancellor Kohl will have remarks here. The President chose not to make his speech at the cemetery itself. He began his day with a visit to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp before going to the German military cemetery, which has caused such controversy here and abroad. Andrea Mitchell, you're at the Bitburg Air Force Base. What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, there is going to be a joint military cemetery. What we have here are 9,000 invited guests, American military personnel, and 3,000 invited Germans. And after all, Tom, this was really the point of what the president wanted to accomplish here before the controversy over the cemetery visit took so much away from this day. This is the point of reconciliation, of the future, looking toward the future, and the point of the joint military role that we have with the German allies. You're going to see four companies of troops demonstrating and parading before the two leaders, 2 American and 2 German. What you're going to hear now, obviously the national anthems of both countries, and later a flyover of German and American aircraft, Tom.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. We'll be coming back to those ceremonies momentarily. We have standing by in Washington right now the NBC News Chief Pentagon Correspondent, Fred Francis.
Morning, Tom.
We'll continue through with the national anthem before we go to you, Fred.
Okay.
You do understand that it does take priority.
I certainly do.
There will be, as I say, some joint troop ceremonies now at the Bitburg Air Force Base, which is one of the major American installations, and in fact we have the largest concentration of our nuclear weapons in Western Europe at that very base. And standing by now in Washington, as I said a few moments ago, is NBC News Chief Pentagon Correspondent Fred Francis. What's the concerns these days? What are the concerns these days in the Defense Department, Fred, about what has been going on? There has been a fair amount of strain in the alliance anyway from a military point of view.
Well, there are 250,000 servicemen in Germany alone, Tom, 10,000 at this base, as you said. And Pentagon officials are very concerned. There are some bases where there is a strain between those 250,000 servicemen and the German people, particularly where the Pershing sites are. But this particular base at Bitburg, which is in fact a first target for Soviet missiles, is a model between American and German relations. So they're concerned that that would be upset. This is a tip of the spear air base, in that it is always on what they call a Zulu alert, where 4 F-15 fighters are on the ramp, fueled, with pilots next to them, ready to go. And so there is concern at the Pentagon.
Thank you very much, Fred Francis. And as we watch the President now and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl reviewing the troops, I have with me in the studio Lawrence Eagleberger, who was the former Undersecretary for Political Affairs in the Reagan administration. He was a Foreign Service for 27 years altogether and is now a private consultant here in New York, working with his friend and boss, Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger Associates. Mr. Eagleberger, you have been paying a lot of attention to the state of the alliance. You served as the ambassador to Yugoslavia. What happens now as a result of this? Do you think that it is strengthened, or is it strained even more because of this controversy?
Well, I think the controversy has strained things for a while at least. I think it's much too early to make a final judgment on whether in the last analysis things are going to be worse or more or less the same after this visit. The President, I think, at Bitburg, I think he's going to say something that I think is terribly important to keep in mind in this whole issue. And that is that there is one very remarkable thing that I think he's trying to memorialize, which is that Germany has gone in 40 years from a dictatorship, the worst in history, to a democracy, a solid democracy, and a solid ally of ours. And I think that's the emphasis he's going to put on it during the visit to Bitburg.
And of course, the great symbolism that we're seeing here of the joint military strength in the NATO alliance. But how long do you think that that can continue? The Europeans, in the judgment of a lot of people, are not making their fair share in terms of contributing to the military alliance. And there is a continuing feeling now that with their difficulties economically in Europe, that they're going to be stepping back from it even more in the years to come.
Well, in the 20-some years I was in the State Department, every year we would always start the conversations about NATO with, at this difficult time in the life of the alliance, and it's still going on. I think there are problems within the alliance. I think, on the other hand, it really is very strong. I think it will come through this debate still strong. I think it is terribly important that the United States be able to maintain a close relationship with the Democratic Federal Republic of Germany. I also think it's equally important, and I think the President, with an eloquence not often matched, made it clear that we cannot forget what happened in those concentration camps, and it can't happen again. So in a difficult situation, I think the President has balanced things about as well as it could be done.
Let me ask you another kind of a question. You served in several administrations. You've watched these kinds of visits be put together. How can this one be so thoroughly botched?
If you can ask the question, I can't give you an answer.
But aren't you a little surprised by it? Because this administration particularly has been very good at this kind of symbolism.
I think there were clearly some mistakes made. There's no question about that. I also, frankly, don't think it's the President's fault, and I think the President, in a difficult situation, as demonstrated by the two guests you've had comment already on this program, finds himself in the middle and has done as well as could be expected under those circumstances. But I can't argue at all that some mistakes were made.
Mr. Eagleberger, we want to go back now to the ceremonies at Bitburg, where we'll be hearing now from West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who has a large stake in all of this as well, obviously.
Were buried there. And with them, we were thinking of all the victims of war, of terror, and all those prosecuted and persecuted, of all nations. This march with President Reagan across the soldiers' tombs of Bitburg was not a very easy step and a very easy march for us to take. Among many, it has and it had to evoke very deep emotions. To me, first of all and immediately, it means sadness and being affected by the incredible misery which war and totalitarian regimes have brought to people, to nations. Sadness and being affected, something that will not go away so quickly. But at the same time, this means for us a commitment to preserve peace and freedom as the prime objective of our political actions. And this march to the tombs of Bitburg also means strengthening a gesture of reconciliation between our nations, the nation and the people of the United States of America and the Germans. A reconciliation which does not forget the past, but tries to overcome the past together. And finally, our being here is evidence of a friendship which has proved to be very long-lasting and very reliable, and which is based on the knowledge of common values. I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, on behalf of all of the German nation, and I would personally like to thank you as a friend. I'd like to thank you for having taken this step, for having made that march together with me. I think that many people in our German nation understand this expression of deep friendship. And I think that for both our nations, this will lead to a very positive future. The city of Bitburg was witness of the decay of the Third Reich in a very special way. In 1945, they suffered, and they also saw the reconciliation and the reconstruction after the war and the years of reconciliation. For 25 years here in Bitburg, there are common celebrations to commemorate this event where American, French and German soldiers and the citizens of the city and the region remember the victims of the past war. And they demonstrate their friendship and their will to fight for the preservation of peace, and they do so over and over again. In a very special way, in these years of very close, friendly relations between the American forces and our nation, ties have evolved, ties have developed, and Bitburg can be seen as a symbol of reconciliation and of German-American friendship. Soldiers of the German forces, most of you, were born after the 8th of May of 1945. You did not experience the war and the system of terror that we had in our country. You grew up at a time where our republic was built up, where it was constructed, at a time where the friendship between us and the American nation has revived and has developed very positively. You've seen and met our American friends as helpers, as partners, and as allies. Days like today are suitable to remember, to remind the young generation, in particular of our nation, that this very fortunate development for us is not to be taken for granted, and that the preservation of peace and freedom is something which requires our very personal commitment. You, the soldiers of the American forces in the Federal Republic of Germany, serve your country, the United States of America, and at the same time also our republic. Security of the Federal Republic of Germany is very closely related to the partnership and friendship with the United States of America. We know what we owe you and your families. We also know that for many of you, overseas service means sacrifices. You can rest assured that in our country, in the Federal Republic of Germany, you're very welcome visitors and guests. And don't let a small negative minority tell you something else. You, as I said, are welcome to us from the bottom of our hearts, as friends, as allies, and as guarantors of our security. The relations between the American forces and the German forces have evolved over many years, and they're as close as they've never been. I would like to thank both the American and the German soldiers for this partnership, which we almost take for granted, because it reinforces our common will to defend peace, freedom in our countries. And that partnership, and that
West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, speaking at the Bitburg Air Force Base, thanking the American servicemen who are there, recognizing their sacrifices, saying that they can count on the support of the West German people. Will be back with President Reagan's remarks in just a moment.
What long-range effect will President Reagan's controversial trip to Germany have on our allies and here at home? A special edition of Meet the Press, live from Bonn, Germany, later today.
I'm Jane Pauley. Next week on Today, John McEnroe, celebrity mothers, inmates who help troubled teens, and the President's European trip. Next week on Today.
Oh, yes, we are proud of yesterday, but our story's just begun. Our eyes are on tomorrow, and the best is yet to come, yet to come.
The arts have always found a home at Fisk. Music, of course, since that day in 1871 when the Fisk Jubilee Singers took the Negro spiritual to the world. But it's much more than song. The music of Fisk rings out in all the creative arts. In the paintings of Aaron Douglas, the poetry of Nicky Giovanni, the novels of Frank Yerby, in the magic of a concert by Roland Hayes, or the sweat of young talent in a campus rehearsal room. The arts are alive and well, and at home at Fisk University, a Tennessee tradition worth knowing about, a dream and a reality worth sharing.
Yes, our hearts are in tomorrow, and our best is yet to come.
The Rise and Fall of Jake Butcher, starting Monday on Channel 4 News.
Received many letters since first deciding to come to Bitburg Cemetery. Some supportive, others deeply concerned and questioning, and others opposed. Some old wounds have been reopened, and this I regret very much, because this should be a time of healing. To the veterans and families of American servicemen who still carry the scars and feel the painful losses of that war, our gesture of reconciliation with the German people today in no way minimizes our love and honor for those who fought and died for our country. They gave their lives to rescue freedom in its darkest hour. The alliance of democratic nations that guards the freedom of millions in Europe and America today stands as living testimony that their noble sacrifice was not in vain. No, their sacrifice was not in vain. I have to tell you that nothing will ever fill me with greater hope than the sight of two former war heroes who met today at the Bitburg ceremony, each among the bravest of the brave, each an enemy of the other 40 years ago, each a witness to the horrors of war. But today they came together, American and German, General Matthew B. Ridgway and General Johannes Steinhoff, reconciled and united for freedom. They reached over the graves to one another like brothers and grasped their hands in peace. To the survivors of the Holocaust, your terrible suffering has made you ever vigilant against evil. Many of you are worried that reconciliation means forgetting. Well, I promise you, we will never forget. I have just come this morning from Bergen-Belsen, where the horror of that terrible crime, the Holocaust, was forever burned upon my memory. No, we will never forget. And we say with the victims of that Holocaust, never again. The war against one man's totalitarian dictatorship was not like other wars. The evil war of Nazism turned all values upside down. Nevertheless, we can mourn the German war dead today as human beings crushed by a vicious ideology. There are over 2,000 buried in Bitburg Cemetery. Among them are 48 members of the SS. The crimes of the SS must rank among the most heinous in human history. But others buried there were simply soldiers in the German army. How many were fanatical followers of a dictator and willfully carried out his cruel orders? And how many were conscripts forced into service during the death throes of the Nazi war machine? We do not know. Many, however, we know from the dates on their tombstones were only teenagers at the time. There is one boy buried there who died a week before his 16th birthday. There were thousands of such soldiers to whom Nazism meant no more than a brutal end to a short life. We do not believe in collective guilt. Only God can look into the human heart. And all these men have now met their supreme judge, and they have been judged by him as we shall all be judged. Our duty today is to mourn the human wreckage of totalitarianism, and today in Bitburg Cemetery, we commemorated the potential good and humanity that was consumed back then 40 years ago. Perhaps if that 15-year-old soldier had lived, he would have joined his fellow countrymen in building this new democratic federal republic of Germany, devoted to human dignity and the defense of freedom that we celebrate today. Or perhaps his children or his grandchildren might be among you here today at the Bitburg Air Base, where new generations of Germans and Americans join together in friendship and common cause, dedicating their lives to preserving peace and guarding the security of the free world. Too often in the past, each war only planted the seeds of the next. We celebrate today the reconciliation between our two nations that has liberated us from that cycle of destruction. Look at what together we've accomplished. We who were enemies are now friends. We who were bitter adversaries are now the strongest of allies. In the place of fear, we've sown trust, and out of the ruins of war has blossomed an enduring peace. Tens of thousands of Americans have served in this town over the years. As the mayor of Bitburg has said, in that time there have been some 6,000 marriages between Germans and Americans, and many thousands of children have come from these unions. This is the real symbol of our future together, a future to be filled with hope, friendship, and freedom. The hope that we see now could sometimes even be glimpsed in the darkest days of the war. I'm thinking of one special story, that of a mother and her young son living alone in a modest cottage in the middle of the woods. And one night, as the Battle of the Bulge exploded not far away and around them, 3 young American soldiers arrived at their door. They were standing there in the snow, lost behind enemy lines. All were frostbitten. One was badly wounded. Even though sheltering the enemy was punishable by death, she took them in, made them a supper with some of her last food. And then they heard another knock at the door. And this time, 4 German soldiers stood there. The woman was afraid, but she quickly said with a firm voice, "There will be no shooting here." She made all the soldiers lay down their weapons, and they all joined in the makeshift meal. Heinz and Willie, it turned out, were only 16. The corporal was the oldest at 23. Their natural suspicion dissolved in the warmth and the comfort of the cottage. One of the Germans, a former medical student, tended the wounded American. But now listen to the rest of the story through the eyes of one who was there, now a grown man, but that young lad that had been her son. He said the mother said grace I noticed that there were tears in her eyes as she said the old familiar words, "Come, Herr Jesus, be our guest." And as I looked around the table, I saw tears too in the eyes of the battle-weary soldiers, boys again, some from America, some from Germany, all far from home. That night, as the storm of war tossed the world, they had their own private armistice. The next morning, the German corporal showed the Americans how to get back behind their own lines. And they all shook hands and went their separate ways. That happened to be Christmas Day 40 years ago. Those boys reconciled briefly in the midst of war. Surely we allies in peacetime should honor the reconciliation of the last 40 years. To the people of Bitburg, our hosts and the hosts of our servicemen, like that generous woman 40 years ago, you make us feel very welcome. Vielen Dank. And to the men and women of Bitburg Air Base, I just want to say that we know that even with such wonderful hosts, your job is not an easy one. You serve around the clock, far from home, always ready to defend freedom. We're grateful, and we're very proud of you. 4 decades ago, we waged a great war to lift the darkness of evil from the world, to let men and women in this country and in every country live in the sunshine of liberty. Our victory was great, and the Federal Republic, Italy, and Japan are now in the community of free nations. But the struggle for freedom is not complete. For today, much of the world is still cast in totalitarian darkness. 22 years ago, President John F. Kennedy went to the Berlin Wall and proclaimed that he too was a Berliner. Well, today, freedom-loving people around the world must say, I am a Berliner. I am a Jew in a world still threatened by anti-Semitism. I am an Afghan, and I am a prisoner of the Gulag. I am a refugee in a crowded boat foundering off the coast of Vietnam. I am a Laotian, a Cambodian, a Cuban, and a Mosquito Indian in Nicaragua. I, too, am a potential victim of totalitarianism. The one lesson of World War II, the one lesson of Nazism, is that freedom must always be stronger than totalitarianism, and that good must always be stronger than evil. The moral measure of our two nations will be found in the resolve we show to preserve liberty, to protect life, and to honor and cherish all God's children. That is why the free, democratic Federal Republic of Germany is such a profound and hopeful testament to the human spirit. We cannot undo the crimes and wars of yesterday, nor call back the millions back to life. But we can give meaning to the past by learning its lessons and making a better future. We can let our pain drive us to greater efforts to heal humanity's suffering. Today I've traveled 220 miles from Bergen-Belsen, and I feel 40 years in time. With the lessons of the past firmly in our minds, we've turned a new, brighter page in history. One of the many who wrote me about this visit was a young woman who had recently been bat mitzvahed. She urged me to lay the wreath at Bitburg Cemetery in honor of the future of Germany. And that is what we've done. On this 40th anniversary of World War II, we mark the day when the hate, the evil, and the obscenities ended. And we commemorate the rekindling of the democratic spirit in Germany. There's much to make us hopeful on this historic anniversary. One of the symbols of that hate, or that could have been that hope, a little while ago, when we heard a German band playing the American national anthem and an American band playing the German national anthem. While much of the world still huddles in the darkness of oppression, we can see a new dawn of freedom sweeping the globe. And we can see in the new democracies of Latin America, in the new economic freedoms and prosperity in Asia, in the slow movement toward peace in the Middle East, and in the strengthening alliance of democratic nations in Europe and America, that the light from that dawn is growing stronger. Together, let us gather in that light and walk out of the shadow. Let us live in peace. Thank you, and God bless you all.
President Reagan concluding his remarks at the Bitburg Air Force Base, it was a carefully crafted speech, an eloquent defense of his decision to visit the Bitburg German military cemetery today. He touched all the right bases, saying to the victims of the Holocaust, we shall never forget. Saying to the Jewish people around the world, we shall never forget. Also, saying to the German victims of Nazism that it's time to go on from here. He also paid tribute to the alliance of the United States and West Germany, politically and militarily. And then he described the other victims of totalitarianism around the world, many of them the victims of Soviet totalitarianism. It must be a great sigh of relief at the White House now that this visit is coming to an end, because this has been a particularly difficult time. And we'll see how the president's political standing has been affected in this country. We can only measure that once he returns. That's Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Cole to her left there. The Coles and the Reagans will be having lunch at the Air Force Base. And then the president will be going on with the rest of his European tour, which includes a visit to Strasbourg, visit to Portugal. Andrea Mitchell, you're at Bitburg Air Force Base. Tell us about that story the president told today about the meeting in the woods during the Battle of the Bulge between the American soldiers and the German soldiers at the house of a German woman. Where did the White House come up with that story?
That's really quite an extraordinary story. It's one of those anecdotes that the president tells from time to time. This, we are told, came from a January 1973 edition of Reader's Digest. The White House says that they did not make any further effort to check it out or research it, but that they were told from the Reader's Digest article that it was written by a woman who did talk to the participants, in particular to the son of the German woman who invited those American soldiers in and then forced the German soldiers, or inspired the German soldiers to put down their arms. One thing we should point out is we see the president and Mrs. Reagan waving to the crowd here with the military band playing, and obviously having turned the corner and turned to a more upbeat setting, something the White House very much desired, is that I was also told by a senior official that the president told his staff that that story actually came from the son of the German woman, and that he had contacted the White House after this controversy erupted. So the president seems to have believed that it came directly from the son, but the staff of the press office is saying that it actually came from the Reader's Digest. Tom, one thing to point out is that the White House very much hoped that this speech in particular, coming after the dramatic Bergen-Belsen speech, would sound those themes of freedom and reconciliation, and also express that the president is sensitive to his critics and make the point that he does understand that Hitler's war was unlike any other war. So that they think that they have achieved this year, and will conclude the state visit tomorrow with another inspirational speech, they hope, to students, university students at Hambach Castle, which has been a center of freedom and democracy in Germany and anti-Nazism. Tom?
Thank you, Andrea. President and West German Chancellor Kohl, as you can see at the top of the ramp there going into Air Force One, they have a strong personal relationship as well as a political relationship. They have established that over the past several years, and many people believe that the president, once he made that personal commitment to Chancellor Kohl after what was described as an emotional meeting in the White House, felt that he could not step back from it. There was some indication that there was pressure put on Chancellor Kohl to withdraw the invitation, but of course he had his own political dilemma that he was dealing with at home. How could he withdraw it and not have an embarrassed West German Republic at the same time? We've been talking about all that this morning with, among others, Lawrence Eagleburger, who is the former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the Reagan administration, and a man who is an expert on the NATO alliance and European politics. What is your conclusion after watching that this morning, Larry Eagleburger? Do you think that the president got through what is a difficult time with grace?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. Grace and eloquence, and you indicated, he hit all of the themes, including the criticisms, tried to answer them. And again, I would come back to say, tried to end this visit, I think, by emphasizing it's a new Germany, it's an alliance with a democratic Germany, and that's the future we have to deal with.
We have now focused, in a way that we haven't for some time, on the meaning of the relationship between the United States and West Germany and the role of the United States in the NATO alliance. You were quoted recently as saying you thought there were only chances of about 60-40 that we would keep the alliance together to the year 2000.
Sometimes I wish I wouldn't be quoted, but anyway, I said that, and it was in the context of concerns about changes over the course of the next decade and a half as we go into the next century. I think, strangely enough, the alliance is in pretty good shape right now, even with this dispute. My concern is that over the course of the next 20 years, with new generations that don't remember the problems of the Second World War, with changes in economies and with our attention increasingly toward the Pacific, that if we don't begin to deal now with some of those concerns and problems, we may well find ourselves with a NATO alliance in the year 2000 that is still there, but where the blood's gone out of the veins.
Is there a possibility that the West Germans now will feel an obligation to strengthen their hand in the NATO alliance as a result of the pressure that they have put on the United States and on this president particularly as a result of this visit?
I suppose one can hope so, Tom. I think, again, it's too early to tell. I think there is no question that this visit has, strangely enough, both reminded everybody of the horrors of 40 years ago, also hopefully reminded everybody that it is now a different Germany. How this will work out in Germany itself and how they will feel about all of this 6 months or a year from now, I think it's still too early to tell. I would hope that, in fact, what it will do is strengthen their commitment to the alliance.
There is a report now out of Bonn today that West German opposition leader Willy Brandt, who was a former chancellor, of course, has canceled his plans to attend a state banquet for President Reagan because he was denied a special meeting with the president. That's a tradition that has gone on for some time. Whenever the president of the United States has gone to West Germany, he's met not only with the chancellor, but the opposition as well. But it was recommended that he not meet with Willy Brandt. Do you think that was a good idea?
I think this is adding another problem to an already problem-strewn visit. Without commenting on whether Willy Brandt really represents the SPD anymore or not, he is head of the party, and I myself think probably the president should have met with him. On the other hand, I have to say I'm not at all sure that Mr. Brandt should have canceled his invitation to the dinner.
All right. Larry Eagleburger, these are difficult times, but thank you for joining us as we walk through this political minefield this morning on Sunday. We want to now show you some of the highlights, if they can be described as that, and I think that they can be accurately, of the president's day at Bitburg and at Bergen-Belsen. Probably one of the most difficult days of his presidency, this May Day. The president at Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp where 50,000 people died, at least, the last to be liberated at the end of World War II. This was added to the schedule, of course, after it was announced the president would visit the German military cemetery. The president's advisor, Mike Deaver, made a hasty trip to Europe to look at various concentration camp sites. The White House had hoped that they could be joined here by prominent American Jewish leaders, but all declined the invitation. Jews and Christians were killed at Bergen-Belsen. Prisoners of war died there as well. And now the President this morning at the Bitburg Military Cemetery. A very brief visit, a walkthrough, if you will, a wreath-laying ceremony. No remarks here. 2,000 German soldiers buried here, including 49 members of the Waffen-SS, the military arm of the elite guard of Adolf Hitler. A recent poll in West Germany said that 72% of the West Germans said that they favored the president visiting the cemetery. And in this country, about half of the American respondents in recent polls opposed the president's plan to visit the cemetery. The president's difficult day in West Germany, concluding with his remarks at Bitburg, the Air Force base where American service personnel have been stationed now for many years following World War II, and where there's a close relationship between that village and the American people who are stationed there. And the president paid tribute to that today. So this is the most difficult part of the president's trip is now over. He will be going back to Bonn. There will be a state banquet tonight. He'll be, as we heard earlier, talking to some university students, and then the president goes on with the rest of his European tour. Among other things, next week, Wednesday, a different kind of tone in Europe. There will be a celebration of VE Day, the celebration of the victory in Europe 40 years ago, and the president will be taking part in some ceremonies in Strasbourg. We want to tell you something about our programming plans for the rest of the day as well. At 12:30 today Eastern Time, NBC News will present a special edition of Meet the Press from Bonn, West Germany, with Marvin Kalb and Roger Mudd. And then at 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'll be back here on NBC News with another, if you will, compilation of this day, an important day, not only for the United States, but for Europe as well. We will be joining you later this afternoon on NBC News. This day at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. This day is just one more reminder that history can be a painful companion, but also a great teacher. We hope to see you later today here on NBC News. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw in New York.